Hello, everyone. We're just gonna let everyone join in here. Appreciate everyone coming in. And we'll probably get started here in about 2 to 3 minutes. I'll just be doing quick introductions and housekeeping. I'll probably repeat that for those that are here already, for those that come in the future. Let's see, we almost have about 50 people, so we'll probably give it to 3 after and get started. Yes, the question was asked, is everyone muted? Everyone else will be muted except for me, presumably. Jeff, you want to give me confirmation? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. With that, we're just about to get started. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to be here just for some quick introductions and housekeeping, at which point I'll hand it over to Jeff to actually go through the presentation and demonstration. So with that, we're here talking about network security verification with Batfish. We wanted to present the use case of how to work with Batfish quickly, right? Just what can be done in just a few minutes. And with that, I will introduce ourselves. I'm Ken Slenza, VP Professional Services here at Network to Code. Been a network engineer pretty much all my career. Been at Network to Code since 2016. With that, I'll allow Jeff to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, Jeff Kayla. I'm a senior architect here at Network to Code. In October, I'll be here at Network to Code for 2 years. Done a few different roles here and just transitioning into architect role in the last month or so. Similar background as Ken. Background was straight network engineering, traditional style, and over time became an automation enthusiast, open source supporter and contributor. And I have over 10 years of experience, both on enterprise side and in service provider environments.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so just a few housekeeping items here. This is the first of a few webinars that we already have planned. For those that have registered, you will be receiving email. You can register for these other ones here shortly. We're going to have a website. And for those of you potentially watching on YouTube in the future, you can just follow us on Twitter to find out how to register for these other events. As mentioned, we will have a website kind of dedicated for to mention all of our webinars and registration for all those as well. Did want to mention we have some upcoming Batfish training, October 20th. The sign up information is here. We have it is a 4-hour, 1-day hands-on Batfish workshop. There is included is a code for a discount. Those that register will also be receiving an email for that. So look forward for that and hope to see you there as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing, hand it over to Jeff to go through the presentation.
Ken? Hey, let me get caught up here. Okay, thanks, Ken, for the introduction and housekeeping items. Hello, thank you again for joining the webinar. My name is Jeff Kayla again, and today we're going to be taking some time to talk a little bit more about the open source project Batfish. We're going to cover top use cases, but the focus of the demo will be around network security policies. Today's agenda, we're going to get started by talking about the existing state of security operations, where I'll summarize kind of some of the observations that we've seen in the industry, being at Network to Code and doing consulting, and also what I've seen in the industry in my previous roles. We will follow that up by doing kind of an introduction to Batfish. We'll talk about what Batfish is, what is their definition from the project perspective, and some of the vendors that are supported, which is one of the key elements to Batfish and how powerful it can be. After that, we're going to talk about how you can get started with Batfish, really in just minutes. We will talk about what the application is comprised of, what that initial data set you need is to kind of get up and running with. And then finally, we'll talk about how you query Batfish to actually basically answer some questions that Batfish makes available. After that, we're going to cover, as I mentioned, some of the top use cases of Batfish, and then we'll jump into the demo, and I'll quickly bring up an environment, show you how to get it spun up. We'll run a few Python scripts, and then we'll kind of analyze the results that we got. So the goal of that part will be showing you essentially what you can accomplish with Batfish in just about 10 minutes time. So existing state of security operations, managing firewall policies and ACLs is complicated. And what we see is a lot of times organizations have many dedicated individuals just for these specific tasks. Security is becoming more and more in a factor in everybody's world, as we all know. All we talk about and see on news articles is essentially talking about security and breaches. So security is complicated, and it's not limited to firewalls. So it does span multiple device types, which makes it even more complicated, where you start putting your security policies on firewalls, but you also have some on routers, switches, firewalls, etc. And which complicates it even more is then you have multiple vendors in most environments. It's very rare we see environments that are a dedicated vendor at this point. Almost all customers that we work with definitely have multi-vendor in their environment. So that could be Cisco, Palo Alto, Juniper, etc. So that complicates handling security concerns and keeping track of security policies. One thing I've noticed throughout my career is just the giant gaps that exist in cleaning up those policies, and not even just cleaning up old policies that are unused, but also looking at old policies and truly hardening them and going through them and making sure that there is no issues within those policies. So as far as what we're seeing and what I've researched is, organizations are going to put more effort into automating new policy deployments over cleaning up existing policies. And that's just because of what we're seeing in the industry around the rapid development and rapid movement of technology. So as the industry adopts new principles, new technologies, it's really just put on the security operations backs to just keep up and adopt at the same fast speed. Things like new application deployment, speed of application delivery, applications migrating their infrastructure from maybe an all-in-one to a microservices technology. There's cloud migration strategies, whether you're going to hybrid cloud or on-prem cloud. And as I mentioned previously, even the speed of deployment of new applications is getting quicker and quicker as we move on. The next one, I think this is probably the biggest one, to be honest, is cleanups are prone to outages. They're scary. Cleaning up security policy, you always have that concern in the back of your head. What happens if I accidentally deleted one of those lines that we actually needed for a critical application? It's essentially prone to outages, and because of that, it just tends to get ignored. Let's just revisit that at a later time. We hear that very often. Another one is, kind of obvious, is high priority issues have to take precedence over cleanup work. If you have, a high priority issue come in or an outage that's happening, you have to focus on that. And you have to take that in account before you can really start cleanup work. And essentially that, is taking precedence over hardening your company's security posture at the same time. So as SOCs are getting more and more popular, your security operations centers, their role is changing and growing over time. They have a growing number of alerts. They have a growing number of tickets to address. They have more and more responsibilities to take on. And they might not have the bandwidth to sit there and manually parse configurations to clean up security policies or ACLs. And finally, all of these have a potential to leave technical debt throughout the network. As I've talked about throughout this slide, and we'll get to it later, that mentality, or hey, we're migrating away from this data center anyways, what's the point of cleaning up security policy, or even keeping security policies in place while you're migrating, just in case you have to fail back over to the previous site. All of those are technical debt that a lot of times during a project initiation you talk about, and then you never talk about it again, and you never follow through with cleaning up the policies. So going into kind of the introduction of Batfish. So Batfish is a network validation tool that provides security, reliability, and compliance. And how it does that is it analyzes configurations from your network devices. And it can also analyze some configurations to simulate some network configs that you might not have. For instance, you're not going to have your ISP's configuration, but you can ingest it into Batfish to kind of simulate what they're sending you. Batfish builds a representation that models network behavior from the device configurations and finds violations that are user defined by you in your network policies. So it enables network engineers to rapidly and safely evolve their network without those fears of security breaches and outages. And to me, one of the big points and things that I liked about Batfish from when I started early on investigating the tooling in the project was, it's multi-vendor, and it supports a lot of the top vendors in the industry. I'll name a few here, but this is not a exhausted list, but it's got full support for Arista, Cisco, F5, Juniper, and Palo Alto. And there's more in development. For instance, Fortinet is in development. They're working on developing some of the models around just AWS networking as well, which is super powerful. So getting started with Batfish. This will get us to a nice starting point to move into use cases and then into the demo. So what is Batfish? What is it built upon? Batfish is built as a Java application. Again, it's an open source project and you can find it on GitHub. And they also have an enterprise offering as well that we will provide reference to later in the slide deck. So Batfish is a Java application, and how it works is it takes in backup configurations and packages those into network snapshots. And one of the big things that I want to mention here and kind of outline is you might be thinking right now, great, now I have to handle more security policy by allowing wherever I instantiate Batfish needs to have access to the network devices. That is actually not a true statement. And that's one of the very unique things about Batfish is no direct access to the network is needed. So once you have your backups and you plug them in, what Batfish does is ingested those configs and it converts them into models. And these models transform the data into a vendor independent data model. And because it's a vendor independent data model, that's where Batfish really is able to harness its power in its questioning services that I will cover shortly. So once you have that up, then you need to be able to query that data model and ask it what Batfish calls questions or queries. You can query the data models and say, hey, I want this piece of information, or I want you to analyze this specific flow. Please provide me back the information. Well, how you do that is via Python. And Batfish has a Python SDK called PyBatfish, again, available on GitHub and PyPy. And once you have that installed, you use PyBatfish to actually query against the Java application itself. So how can we get started in just minutes with this? It seems like a complicated system. In order to do that, they actually bundled the entire project in a Docker container. So they're gracious enough to publish that container up on GitHub, GitHub and Docker Hub. So it's easy to consume, easy to pull down, and it's very easy to get up and running with this application. As of right now, there are 2 different variants of that Docker container that Batfish has available. They have the Batfish, Batfish only, essentially just what you need to get up and running. It runs the service, but it doesn't come with any of the extra add-ons. The other option is the Batfish all-in-one that comes packaged with Jupyter notebooks. And this is a very great starting point. So if you're gonna go after this call and download this image, get started, I would highly recommend doing the all-in-one. And that's because it includes some fantastic walkthroughs of the different capabilities and use cases right there available in Jupyter notebooks and available right by the just navigating to the specific port. So now that we've covered getting started with Batfish, let's take a few minutes and talk about some of the top use cases for Batfish outside of the direct demo that we're going to be working on today. So some of the top use cases for Batfish is pre-change validation. This is a very powerful one. This is a lot of demos already available on resources for pre-change validation, but it goes into your configuration consistency. You can do routing table verification. And most importantly, what we all want to know is, hey, I have this change control that I'm about to do tonight, and is it potentially going to break something? So what pre-change validation gives you is the ability to snapshot up all of your config changes within those backup configs and actually go and query Batfish against those and ask it questions that you care about. So maybe those questions are, hey, I have 5 super high priority applications that cannot go down. They have very high SLAs. I want to make sure that these specific flows still work with this new configuration in place. Kind of building on top of that idea is path analysis and verification, where you can do route tracing and path validation with Batfish. And I'm not talking about a trace route using ICMP or UDP. This is literally a hop by hop analysis. Because Batfish does model the entire network and the data plane and the routing, it knows what the routing table looks like based off of configuration. So as you plug in essentially a packet or a source destination IP plus port and protocol, it can actually go into a router, and you provide it a starting place, and it can literally look at the routing table and make logical decisions based on the routing table where that specific packet would exit, and it can flow throughout the entire snapshot of Batfish data and actually validate a path from A to Z. So that's super powerful. And in addition to that, you can actually include or write in some extra steps in that validation of, hey, not only do I want to validate that the path is successful from point A to Z, maybe I want to validate if any of the ACLs or security policies are hit on this path. Are they permitted or are they denied for this specific packet? So it's very powerful in what you can do with Batfish. The next use case that we talk about is network data imports and data population. So this is a big one, especially when you go in and you're starting your network automation journey. You're not sure where you want to start. Maybe you go and get an Autobot, or you have a source of truth and you want to be able to populate it with an initial data set. Batfish is powerful to be able to pull in some data that you have in your brownfield environment. If you were doing a greenfield environment, brand new environment, it'd be very easy to just say, okay, I have these tools. I need to populate these tools with the accurate data. But over time, that becomes more and more difficult. So you can actually do configuration property affirmation and use Batfish, pull in configurations, and actually query it for configuration properties. So an example of configuration properties are, hey, give me the NTP servers off of this specific node, or give me the AAA settings, or give me all of the route policies or the route maps that are on this. Very powerful information that you can get, and you can get that network wide very quickly in a very easy to consume manner. The final one is kind of the big dog of the use cases, and that's the true net DevOps mentality of a network CI/CD pipeline, where you're really taking all of the use cases that I mentioned previously and wrapping them into a CI/CD pipeline. You can accelerate your network changes with this. You can feel confident that your network changes are not going to cause network disruptions because you've made your changes. Maybe you're doing infrastructure as code, and you made your changes in the code. You can have a CI/CD pipeline generate configurations, make a new Batfish snapshot, and analyze what you define as important questions to answer. And again, those important questions might be up to the specific operator here, where the example I said previously about, making sure applications are reachable post change. Maybe you have another one where you want to do more network specific tasks, like, hey, I want to validate that every single network element on my network has at least 2 NTP servers, or they have these specific NTP servers. You can do very popular queries, and that's the great part about Batfish is it's almost instantaneous on it returning that data at that scope. So that kind of covers the use cases on what I wanted to cover as far as outside the scope of the demo use cases. And we'll move into the demo next. So what we wanted to do for this specific webinar is actually provide kind of a demo environment that you can go clone down and follow along with me if you want, or revisit once it's up on YouTube and follow along that way. I'll see if Ken can grab that link and put it in the chat. So feel free to follow along. There is a README included in there, and it kind of goes through the few prerequisites that you need, Docker and Poetry, and then it goes through the few steps to get your environment up and running. And then I will also be covering that in a few minutes here. So Batfish is a powerful tool, and you can use it in very complex manner, whether we talked about CI/CD pipelines or you want to validate deployment. And most demos that are available out there today do touch on that entire aspect. And if you're just getting started with Batfish, that might feel overwhelming, or maybe you're just getting started with network automation in general, that can feel overwhelming. So today I really wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to see what I could do in just about 10 minutes of time. And I wanted to avoid any of those super complex data flows that might be overwhelming to some. So the other thing that I did do kind of more for fun, and I thought the idea made a little bit more sense, is instead of me going and crafting very specific configurations to demo where I know exactly what the failures are going to be, I just went and grabbed some publicly available configs to query against. And it's actually it shows exactly what I wanted to show, and it was a more fun way to get started with that. So the demo itself, we're going to cover essentially 3 different questions. And again, questions are what Batfish calls them. It's basically a specific query against the data set. And getting started with Batfish doesn't have to be complicated. It's a dynamic tool, but you can get fantastic results in a brownfield environment by even just doing these 3 specific questions against your specific configuration data set. So these can be grouped into 2 separate concepts to kind of follow along with the name of the webinar. Cleaning up configurations would handle your unused structures in your configuration. And it's essentially unused configuration. And what that does is that'll actually return structures, ACLs, route maps that are defined in your configuration, but they're not actually used anywhere. So they haven't been applied to an interface, but an ACL has 1,000 lines in it and it was created on the box. It's just not used. The second part of the cleaning up configurations is actually undefined references, which for me took a minute to understand, but it's almost the complete opposite of what unused configurations is. And what that will find is structures that are actually applied somewhere, but are not defined. So if we go back to the simple ACL perspective, I have an interface, and on that interface, I have an access list or an access group applied, but that access list that I'm referencing is not actually built anywhere in the config to reference. So these ones have serious consequences. You could think have a great security posture on a device, and maybe you typoed your ACL name, and now you don't actually have an ACL applied inbound or outbound at all on an interface, even though it appears to look that way. And the second concept is more the hardening of your policies. And for that, I'm going to demonstrate the unreachable lines question that Batfish has available. And what unreachable lines does is it actually will find lines that cannot match a packet. And that's maybe because it's shadowed by another rule. For instance, maybe there's a rule earlier up in the access list that is allowing that same traffic. That line can never be hit, or because the actual condition is empty. So over the next few slides, I'm going to be demoing each specific use case, but also have some visualizations to try to make sure that the point is very clear on what these specific questions do. So you can see here in the diagram, pretty simple ASA configuration in this case. I have a few interfaces defined. There's no access list or access group assigned to those interfaces, but you can see at the bottom, there's actually an ACL definition written, but it's unused. So all that's doing is taking up space in the configuration. It's not used anywhere in the configuration, whether that being it's old, or maybe it's a future state, or maybe it was a typo. So that's what unused configurations and the unused structures will provide you, is anything that you have written out or you have configured that isn't actually being applied or used anywhere. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of jump over to my IDE and kind of get going here. So I made the font a little bit bigger. I hope that helps. As I mentioned previously, this is the repository that I mentioned. And if you want to follow along, there is a README provided inside there and on how you get started. So for the sake of time, I went through and did a few of these quickly beforehand. So I'm basically to the bringing Batfish container up section. But essentially, for the high level, in case you don't want to go through the README and read it, I can explain it pretty quickly. We're using Poetry for our packaging here. So you'll want Docker install on your device and also Poetry. And all I did was run Poetry shell and then Poetry install. And that will install all of my requirements that I have, all my Python dependencies that I have to kind of get PyBatfish up and running in this case. The next thing is I have Docker files already in there and a Docker compose file to just bring up a simple container. And that's what I'm going to do now. So if you see Docker PS right now, I don't have any container up. All I'm going to do is do Docker compose up -d. And if you're not familiar with the -D, that's just detach mode. So all of the logging of that container won't show up on my screen. So you can see how quick it is. I did already have the image downloaded. So if you don't have the image locally, it might take a few extra seconds while it downloads from Docker Hub. But you can see now I have my Batfish container up. And you can see it has a few of its API ports exposed. And that's what PyBatfish talks to. And you can see it's a Java application. So now that that container is up, I'm going to go ahead and let's see here. I'm already there. So you can see here, I have pre-populated a few of these configurations. And these configurations, you can see example, I have some ASA, just some random routers and firewalls, and then Juniper and Panorama as well. So these are, again, I just found these publicly available online, and I thought it would be fun to use those and really analyze something that I wasn't already familiar with or that I didn't build myself. So if you wanted to reuse this exact environment for maybe one of your configurations, all you'd need to do is dump your configuration in that configs directory. So in order to actually run it, I have everything defined right here in just kind of this quick class that I wrote for Webfish webinar. And all we have to do is run this script and it'll go ahead and do the 3 questions and I will talk through the outputs. So all I'm going to do here is now that I'm inside my Poetry virtual environment that has all of my dependencies, I will run my batfish analysis.py file. And what this is doing is it's creating a session from PyBatfish into the Java application. It's providing the volume mount that these configurations are loaded into so that Batfish knows, okay, here's my configurations. It's generating a snapshot. You can see here, I kind of left this in place. Snapshot was successful. And this is pretty typical. There is going to be some unrecognized commands. So Batfish doesn't have parsing built for every single command, but it has parsing built for commands that it needs to understand in order to do the data modelings that it supports. And then finally, kind of just a success message. So what this did was it actually generated 3 different files. It generated my undefined references, my unreachable lines, and my unused structures. And what I actually did was, if you noticed in the actual Python code, is because PyBatfish actually can return a pandas data frame, it gives you a lot of flexibility on how you want to output that. Pandas is extremely powerful on its own. And being able to utilize what that data frame has kind of out of the box, whether you want to, in my case, go to HTML, or it has a 2 markdown or a 2 CSV, and it depends on your use case on what one of those will work best for your environment. So all I'm doing is essentially taking the pandas data frame of that result data, and I'm saying, hey, I want to actually make this into HTML table.
Hey, Jeff, as you make that transition, just a quick time check. We have about 10 minutes. I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions as well.
Okay. Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, so I have my 3 Batfish results here. And the first one we're covering is the unused structures. So there's a lot here, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to cover every one of them. But you can see it's a very concise list. This is telling me any of my ACLs that I have defined, what lines they're defined on, and what structure type they are. And again, just to reiterate, unused structures is simply telling you, hey, you have ACLs built, and these ACLs are not applied anywhere. So you can see most of these are from that ASA config, but I do have a few from the router config and even the Panorama config. So next, I want to talk about the undefined references. Again, this diagram will help kind of show exactly what we're talking about as far as undefined references go. You can see here, I actually do have an interface configuration and I have an access group going inbound, but I had assigned it access group 110. And you can see by the outputs, we don't actually have access list 110 built anywhere in our configuration. So this could have some serious consequences if you're expecting a policy to be there and it's actually referencing something that doesn't exist. So if I go over here to my undefined references, you can see, again, very clean HTML table, very easy to understand. And you can see it gives you the reference name and it tells you the exact lines of that config that it's referenced on. And again, most of these are from the ASA config, but I do have a few on the router config as well. And finally, to me, the most complicated, but also the kind of the one that can provide the most help is unreachable lines. So this diagram is here to help you understand what unreachable lines means. And unreachable lines essentially means, hey, you probably have a shadow line somewhere in your ACL that's already catching this flow. And because of that, it'll never hit this flow down here. So you can see in this case here, there's a permit for the 1010 or for the 1000/16, and it allows to anywhere. But lower on the access list, there's a 10.0.10.0.00/16. That line can't be hit. That specific flow will always be hit by this first line of the ACL. So this is a very simple example, ACL that has, 10 or so lines. But imagine when you have an ACL that's 1,000 lines or longer, it gets very complicated to be able to identify this type of issue. You can see here, if I run over to unreachable lines, it's very helpful in the fact that it provides quite a bit of information. It tells you where the source was, which specific line is unreachable, what that unreachable line action is. And for me, out of this, a lot of times, the most important thing is, hey, there was 2 different lines. Are they actually different actions? And that's what that diagram showed previously was, hey, I had a permit, but I was actually expecting to do a deny on this lower line. So that provides a very helpful identification of maybe the things you want to fix first. And then finally, over here on the far right-hand side, it gives you some additional information. So for instance, this one was a blocking line. These ones are independently unmatchable, meaning it actually can't be hit. And then if we scroll down, you can see that's what most of those ones are and what device they were on. So that was kind of the demo. Sorry, I ran through the last few a little bit quick there, but I'll go ahead and take some time for some questions before we talk about some existing resources that are available.
Great. Awesome job, Jeff. And true former really was what can be done with Batfish in 10 minutes, and you nailed it. There was one question. I'll just kind of one let's say technical question. I've answered already, but just for the larger audience, the question was: are there specific firewall platforms to which Batfish is more suited? Example being those that use text-based configs, and others it will not work. For example, Checkpoint that uses database or store policy. Will Batfish work for Checkpoint firewalls? So one, Batfish already has support for Checkpoint firewalls. There are certain components of it that are based on some text base of it. Ratul from Batfish was kind enough to answer. He mentioned that there's some other format, such as a binary or something similar, that they need to build a parser for. They would be able to tackle such a use case. I see a few more questions coming in. Great. Any device limits on the free version of Batfish versus Enterprise? I believe the answer is no.
Correct. Yeah, there's no limitations on number of devices. Enterprise offers support, but it also has a few other helper functionalities. But all of the actual features in Batfish, the free version, the open source version, are there and are not limited to a device count.
Okay. So I was actually quite proud of myself for being right on time for sending as soon as you mentioned, I hit enter on chat. Unfortunately, it only sent to hosts and panelists. I do not see an option to send that link to attendees, perhaps my novice nature in this part. However, I did put it in twice in 2 different Q&As. So if you go to the Q&A section, you should see the link in there as well. Does Batfish support Cisco FTDs? I do not believe so. I will.
Yeah, I would need to double check on that. I don't know off the top of my head.
If Ratul is watching and wants to Slack me, I could give a definitive answer there as well. Okay. It can work with switches and other kind of device infrastructure. Correct. Yes, it works with many different things that it parses. There's even A10, Arista, AWS, Cisco, Checkpoint, Cumulus, F5, Fortinet, Juniper, Palo, and Sonic. Just from what I'm reading from the Batfish site, I'm not sure if that is the most up-to-date information or not. Thank you, Chrissy. Perhaps I don't, I will. Yeah, perhaps I don't know how to do it, but I was unable to find that to send that to chat. Okay, FTDs, no. ASAs, yes. Big thanks to Ratul for being so timely. Okay, Arista, I'm answering just in chat as well. Okay, any other questions as we round out the last 3 minutes? We can go through, if you want to go to the resources slide, Jeff, and we'll give a last minute or 2 for any last minute questions.
Yeah. So here's some resources for you. If you're interested in the Batfish Enterprise, you can find it on attentionnet.com under their products tab, and you'll see Batfish Enterprise listed there. You can also go batfish.org, where they have quite a bit more information, and they have a very helpful resources section right on batfish.org that has a great list of blog posts that they've seen, that they've done, and also that they've seen in the industry, along with some example code that's been published by the Batfish folks, as well as other open community folks. The demo is there as well. And there's an intro to Batfish YouTube link there. That's would be very powerful. Finally, I'll kind of just say that if you are interested in Batfish and you're maybe familiar with Java and you want to maybe take a crack at actually contributing back to Batfish, I'm currently working on Batfish blog right now on how to actually contribute to Batfish. And you can also find all of our Batfish related blog posts right on Network to Code's blog using the tag called Batfish.
Yeah, great point there, Jeff. So Jeff specifically has, for a customer, helped build out some of these parsers and so forth. So this is, something that we've done before. And so if there's kind of some interest, feel free to reach out to us at Network to Code. Okay, and with that, as mentioned before, we have several other webinars coming in the near future. So look forward to seeing everyone there as well. No more questions. Right on time, we'll end it. Thank you, everyone. And well done, Jeff.
Thank you.